Hey everyone, today I thought I'd try something new. I want to talk about a couple of games that I played recently and my thoughts on them. I didn't want to make a huge video for each one of them, although if I had the time and energy maybe I would have, but there's just so many great games out there and so many bad games masquerading as great games that I just don't have the time. So I've played a handful of them recently and I feel like I just want to talk about them. I want to tell you what my opinions are of them. The first is a game called Neva, which I hadn't really heard of before, but it looked great in the promotional advertisements, it was on sale, so I gave it a try, I played a bit of it, I streamed a bit of it, and it is a beautiful looking, side-scrolling platformer. It reminded me of the game Journey for the PlayStation 3, because it is a spectacular visual voyage, and also the red flowing cape that you're wearing, that probably also reminded me of it. But there's actual combat in this game. You use your sword, and you sick your dog to attack some evil-looking cockroach demons, and it's a fair amount of fun. I heard some folks comparing this game to The Last Guardian, which is not a game that I've played, but you do have a dog partner that you can rely on, and you depend on, so I can see the comparisons. The dog starts off kinda weak as a small puppy. This isn't exactly an escort quest, but the dog starts off having limited utility. But as you progress, the dog gets bigger and more powerful and has more abilities. The dog is just great. It behaves like an actual dog, it has dog-like behaviors, it whimpers, it barks, it's very playful, sometimes it doesn't listen, although usually if you whistle enough, it'll listen and the dog will come back to you. There's a dedicated pet button to comfort her when she's sad, or to reward her for good behavior. It's pretty easy to develop a bond with her, which makes things very intense when her safety is at risk. Oh, no, whoa, hey! Oh! Again, one of the biggest draws of this game is just how beautiful it is, and I would recommend it on that basis alone, but it also is a really fun side-scrolling platformer. We played it for a few hours and we had a great time. Maybe one day I'll finish it. The next game I tried was released last year, but I didn't get around to playing it until just now. Pacific Drive. It is a survival crafting game where the thing you're crafting the most is vehicle upgrades and repairs. It's a very simple game with a very simple gameplay loop. You leave your base, you loot some things, you return, you fix up your vehicle, and maybe get a few upgrades. But leaving the base to get the supplies is a very surreal experience. There are a lot of strange anomalies littered throughout the world. Floating rocks, strange exploding mannequins, the terrain shifts and there are unearthly creatures all over the place. Some of those creatures can do serious damage to your car, so you might need to make some quick fix repairs while you're on the road. But most of what you're doing out there is driving around, finding abandoned buildings here and there, and hoping there's some good stuff inside. Or if you're lucky, you might find a broken down cargo truck. Those are usually filled with quite the haul. I started off having a pretty good time with this game, but after the first few hours, it had left a really rotten taste in my mouth. The world out there is deadly, and I found myself dying quite a lot. And dying in this game is quite painful, as not only do you lose out on all the loot you've been scavenging for the last hour, but now you need to spend the next 15 minutes fixing up your damaged car, using up supplies you'd already stockpiled. It makes me want to go back and load an earlier save, cause playing for 2 hours means I've made backwards progress. It sucks. Now the first time this happened, I was mildly annoyed. The second time it happened, I was frustrated. But the fourth time this happened in a row, I was ready to punch my computer. I was pissed. 6 hours later, and it felt like I hadn't made any progress in the game whatsoever. I was so peeved. I almost gave up on it then and there. But I gave it another try, as I often do. Sometimes I'm just not in the right mindset, sometimes I have a bad first experience, and I like to give games a second try if I can. And this time I had a much better time. I cranked the difficulty down to the easiest setting, and yeah, it was a lot easier to not die, although it did feel like I was just being flooded with crafting supplies now. I was making progress a little too quickly. Luckily, the game has a wide variety of settings you can mess with, and there's probably a sweet spot between the two difficulties I was playing on that would have been ideal for me. Normal was a bit frustrating, easy was a bit too easy, but at least on easy I was finally making progress and having fun without the severe punishment of losing all of my progress every hour. There was one more mechanic that I found interesting enough that I definitely wanted to mention, and that is the vehicle's quirks. Everybody's car, every player's car, behaves a little differently, and this ramshackle car that you drive that is held together with faulty wiring and chewing gum, it's bound to develop some strange behaviors. For me, the car's radio kept turning on of its own accord. I kept turning it off and it kept turning itself back on, and that started to piss me off. At first I thought it was just bad game design, like maybe the coders missed a spot and now the radio automatically turns itself on every time you enter your car or something. But I eventually realized it was because my car had an electrical error. Whenever I closed the back door of my car, whenever I closed the trunk, that was what triggered the radio to turn on. There is a mechanic in which you can diagnose and repair these quirks, and I did so at the earliest opportunity so I could finally enjoy some peace and quiet. But that's the kind of random thing that just kinda happens to your car sometime. Other quirks can be equally problematic, like how putting my car in park sometimes caused the passenger side door to fly open. So every time I would park my car, my passenger side door would open. So just getting around meant I was always driving with my passenger side door flapping in the wind. Quirks like that, repairing those is a high priority. But other quirks can be funny, so I just leave them in. Like, there was one quirk that caused my windshield wipers and fuel gauge to sync up, so every time I turned on my windshield wipers, my fuel gauge was like a third mini windshield wiper. That was delightful. Overall, Pacific Drive was a fun survival game. I ended up playing for a good 15 hours, and I made some decent progress, although I did hit a bottleneck on crafting ingredients toward the end game, and lost interest. I kept going on half-hour expeditions to find a specific ingredient, couldn't find it, return, and eventually I got bored, and I moved on. But I enjoyed my time with the game, and I might return to it in the future. Another new game that came out recently was called Crypt of the Necrodancer, and if that name sounds familiar, it's because it's from the same game designers, the same game makers, as Crypt of the Necrodancer, which I had never played, but I had heard good things about. But this other game, Crypt of the Necrodancer, it's brand new, and they have a demo, so I decided to try the demo. The final product is supposed to have more than 30 songs on release, but the demo had just 4, so I tried those 4. And this game feels very similar to a couple of PlayStation 2 games that I played, called Frequency and Amplitude. But most people will take one look at this and go, oh, that looks like Guitar Hero, because most people know what Guitar Hero looks like. It's a bunch of notes flying at you from the far side of the screen, and you gotta hit the notes on the timing. But this game is a little different because the notes move around a bit more. They're very erratic, different monsters, they require different types of button presses. You gotta double tap on the bats, you gotta really rapidly double tap on the skeletons holding shields, the zombies move left and right. The notes themselves, you have to learn what their behaviors are so you can click on them at the right time. And it takes a bit of trial and error, a lot of experience. Now, I am a big fan of rhythm games. I'm a rhythm game veteran, so I played this on the medium difficulty. I skipped right over easy because that seemed too easy, and medium difficulty seemed like the appropriate difficulty for me. Hard? I could get a lot of the songs eventually, but hard is legitimately hard. And one look at impossible and I knew it was going to be legitimately impossible for me. Just looking at that, I know it's not for me. But I could probably beat most songs on the medium difficulty without trying too hard, and if I wanted a challenge, I could play on the harder difficulties, practice that a few times until I get the songs down packed. Overall, I had a fun time with the demo, and I will probably pick up this game in the future. While I was looking at this new game, I noticed that Crypt of the Necrodancer was on sale for dirt cheap, and I knew about this game, but I've never played it myself. I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I never played it myself. And I tried it, and it is a rhythm game, but it's much different from other rhythm games I've experienced. It's hard to describe, but it's a rhythm-based roguelike, styled like an old 8-bit Zelda-style game. You bounce around with the beat. You fight a procedurally generated level, you kill the enemies, grab the loot, try to find the stairs, and leave. After 3 floors of doing this, you unlock a boss fight, which is going to be a little tricky, but if you beat the boss, you have a small cutscene, and you unlock the next level, which has harder enemies. Each attempt through a level takes about 10 minutes, so if you fail, it's quite easy to go, well, I'll just try again, because each attempt won't take that long. It's a very addictive roguelike in that regard. I found myself really enjoying this game, although there are plenty of moments of frustration, especially on the harder difficulty levels, the harder chapters. The red dragons in Chapter 2 are just the absolute worst. You have to memorize a very specific attack pattern, and even though I have it down packed now, it was still very frustrating to learn, and if I didn't look up the pattern, I would have probably given up, because he's very frustrating to deal with. In fact, there are 4 chapters in the game, but I was only able to beat the first 2. I turned the difficulty down, I unlocked some of the game's settings to crank down the difficulty a bit, and that did allow me to beat the 3rd chapter, but I still have yet to beat the 4th and final chapter, even after turning the difficulty down. Some of these enemies are difficult, and they swarm you in the later chapters. It can be problematic. But despite the frustrations, I really enjoyed my time with this game. I've got several hours of playtime, so I've already gotten my money's worth out of this game, and I had a fun time with it, and I recommend checking it out. And finally, Portal 2. Now, this is not the first time I've played this game. I played it way back in 2011, which feels like a lifetime ago. I got all the trophies on PlayStation 3, which is just an indicator of how much I really enjoyed this game. Recently, I put it in my top 25 games of all time list, and I was mostly referring to the single-player experience, because the single-player experience of Portal 2 is really well done. But there's also a co-op experience, a 2-player mode, a fun cooperative puzzle game. And because Zach couldn't come over to record with me this week because I had COVID and I was getting over that, we decided to play this game online instead. We had both played this game before, but because it had been so long, neither of us remembered the puzzle solutions or how the story went. But together we had a great time. We beat all 5 chapters with minimal frustration. It's not a terribly long campaign, but there are multiple fan-made community courses you could play as well, if you want more. I'm not sure I've played very many cooperative puzzle games that have been this fun. I think Portal 2 might be the only one I've enjoyed of this nature, but I know there's probably more out there. And there you have it, a handful of games that I really enjoyed and by and large recommend to anyone who's interested in them. I'm trying to play a wider variety of games this year because sometimes I feel like I've got the habit of falling back into my comfort zone and just playing the same handful of games over and over. But trying new experiences, trying new games is how I found some of my favorite games of all time. So give me some recommendations. I'm hopeful I can play an even wider variety of games this year and see what I've been missing out on. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.